There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube about how to build your own or a kid's rock climbing wall. Climber Dad, Family Handyman, Bro Builds are some of the ones that I found that you should check out if you're looking to do things right. But if you're looking to see what happens when you make mistakes, you're in the right place. This video is going to show you my experience building this climbing wall, reasons why I did what I did, and mistakes I made so you can see what happens if you listen to people like me. Dang! I built this climbing wall for a few reasons. One is because I wanted to make this basement a kids area where they can be safe, get tired out, and learn to overcome physical obstacles in the hopes they can see how capable they are. And although rock climbing is inherently dangerous, kids are going to climb anything they can. Might as well direct all that primal desire to a place that's meant for climbing rather than something that's not. And the second reason is because this basement has 12-foot ceilings, I feel obligated to build something that utilizes that space. But with any major house project, you got to get approval from your local authorities.
I think we should do a rope.
You want the rope?
Oh, that's fun.
Right?
So they can go behind it and look. Oh, wow. You think you could do this? It's
No,
amazing, baby.
I don't.
It's really intense.
Yeah. I might be just getting too cocky, you know.
I love it. It's brilliant.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the goal. You want to sign off on it? I plan this wall out to be slightly overhang, about 15 degrees, and you might say, Dan, that'll make it too hard for the kids to do. Well, I mean, you can place holds and volumes to blunt that, but kids are great at climbing. They're light compared to their strength, so climbing will be easier for them than it will be for a 230-pound adult. But also, the overhang will more or less ensure if someone slips on a hold, they're not going to bash their chin on another hold on their way down. The overhang gives allowance for abrupt falls. Before I started, the local authorities made sure I cleaned the area well. I don't want to risk mold growing out of control over the years, so I'm making sure I build access to behind the wall to clean again. I'd highly recommend being able to access the back of the wall, and you'll see why. The first step was framing. The standard for any home wall framing is to space the 2x4 studs 16 inches apart. This is measured from the center of each stud, hence why you hear everyone say 16 inches on center. However, you don't have to do this on a climbing wall since it doesn't have to hold up an entire house. I did here because I wanted to have a narrow floor above, but this will potentially cause issues, and we'll talk about that when we talk about drilling T-nut holes. But this part is fairly straightforward. If you're making a straight wall, no need to cut angles. But if you're making an angle, you can cut the ends of each stud at each given angle. For example, if you're making a 15-degree overhang, cut the studs at the ends at 15 degrees. Just make sure to cut the ends parallel. So the stud is going to be a rhombus, right? A square tilted like this with the opposite sides being parallel, not a trapezoid, which is just one pair that's parallel, right? Yeah, it's a rhombus. This one. Measure out all your studs, screw all of them together, and then lift them up. I added a kickboard literally because I saw other people have done that. I think it's a good standard to do just because it's easier to start this way and you won't have dead space in between the mat and the angle of the wall. My kickboard is 16 inches, but as long as it's higher than your mats, I'm sure it will be okay. Please note, it's worthwhile to put the stud right up against the base and the top 2x4 so that the plywood wall is flush and doesn't have a gap or a step to it. Additionally, plywood comes in 4 feet by 8 feet sheets, so maybe put 2 studs back to back at the 4 or 8 foot marks along the frame. When you screw the plywood on, you'll want a solid stud to screw it at the edge of the plywood since that's the most vulnerable section. And if a hold goes here, you'll be pulling on the hold and testing the strength of the plywood rather than relying on it being fastened to the frame. I didn't do this, and later on I definitely have some free plywood ends with holds on it. There's a solution in this, but it's more secure and easier to solve this potential issue at this step rather than later on. So try to double up on studs if you know that the plywood ends are going to go there. The worst thing that can happen is the wall falls on somebody while they're climbing. So this part is pretty crucial. The first 8 feet of my basement is foundation, and although I've been told I can drill into it, I really don't want to. But the next 4 feet is framing. So I had to find the studs along the wall, which again are at 16-inch intervals, and lag screw 2x6s on it. This 2x6 has to be strong enough to hold the weight of the wall, plus everything on it, and everyone climbing on it. So figure a couple hundred pounds for the wall and a couple hundred pounds for the climber. Add in a margin of error, and I'm thinking it needs to hold about 500 pounds, pulling it straight out. This isn't the case because the floor can hold up most of that weight, and not all of that weight will be pulling straight out, but let's plan for the worst. Each individual lag screw has a pull strength of this amount, and I used 14 lag screws plus some other screws, which was plenty. I used other 2x6s to toe nail into the lagged 2x6. These were what I use as joists, or essentially lumber that spans the gap to hold the floorboards up. This is most likely the weakest point, and if the wall was going to fall, it was going to fail at this point. So I used joist hangers where I could to both secure it into the wall and add reinforcement for standing on the wall. I bolted the joist into the frame as well. I later added 3-inch plywood on top that was screwed into the frame, the joist, and the wall for final security. A good rule of thumb is if you're ever building something that needs to be safe, you should probably test the safety yourself first.
Looks good. Jump, 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 jump.
All right, watch out, Billy. Here we go. Oh God. That was scary.
Yeah.
I was scared for a little bit.
Good job.
The plywood part is easy, but I made it hard. I had to prime and paint the whole sheet to make these mountains, and I hate painting. I added some grit to the paint for a textured feel on the wall, but I decided it was better to use the grit for the holds rather than the wall. In retrospect, use the grit for the wall too. It makes the surface so much better for smearing. That being said, smearing your foot on the wall, not smearing the paint. And it prevents the holds from spinning once you put them on if they're too small for 2 points of connection. Once you've painted what you want, now it's time to drill. I got these T-nuts from McMaster-Carr and need a 7/16 hole for each one of them. Ideally, they would be straight on and not at an angle, so building a jig with a drill press, if you have one, would be smart. Also, you don't need holes every 6 inches like I did on this first kickboard section. That's too many in too small a space. The bolts that fasten the climbing hold will thread onto these nuts. They're helpful to add since they're pretty strong and they won't leave 1,000 small holes in your plywood over time. Although you probably need screws regardless, but this will lessen the number of screws that you'll need to use for each hold. This way, it's just a little more secure and a little more sustainable. Do not place all the T-nuts on the plywood and then try to hammer them all in. They'll all pop off like you failed at perfection. Other videos share that you need to hammer in all the T-nuts, and I thought, you don't need to hammer them in that hard, but you do. You need a metal hammer, not a rubber mallet, and you need to hit them hard. It's a lot of noise. Once you got the T-nuts hammered in, you're ready to throw up that bad boy. That's not gonna work. Give me. Cool. All right, it's up. If you were able to make the studs flush against the base and the top 2x4, fastening the framing will be a breeze. If you also doubled up the studs at the 4-foot mark, it will be all that much easier. If you didn't double up the studs, you can add a spacer in between the studs that you do have, screw that on, and then screw the edge of the plywood to that space. That only secures one point of the edge of the plywood to the framing, not the entire edge. So best to plan for fastening the edges of the plywood to the framing while you're doing the framing. And that was it, at least for the wall section. You also need climbing holds and mats, both of which you can buy. But I made both of those, which is why it doesn't look nearly as good as it could. The holds I just shaped out of scrap 2x4s, which is pine wood. Pine is a softwood, not really made for this purpose since the hold itself can break more easily, but I did it to just see what happens and it worked out okay, at least for now. But when you bolt on the holds, the bolt itself may be too long, but that's okay since the bolt will go all the way through the Tina on the other side and the excess will just be behind the wall. However, if you happen to drill a T-nut hold that lines up with a stud, the stud will prevent the excess from threading through. This isn't a less secure connection, but it is a problem if you don't have the exact length bolt needed. This occurs more often if you space the studs 16 inches apart, but you can prevent it by planning out where you drill your holes. Just keep in mind, ideally your holes for your T-nuts should not line up with the studs behind. Also, do not tighten the bolt super tight on the wall. The T-nuts are stuck on the plywood by these prongs. If you tighten the bolts too tight, it could bend the prongs back or strip the wood behind the hole so the T-nuts have nothing to grab onto. If you do end up stripping the T-nut prongs, you need to get behind the wall, hold the T-nut with some pliers while someone else loosens it, and this can be very annoying. The bolts holding on the climbing holds do not have to be super tight. They just have to be snug. You'll also most likely need a screw to prevent the holds from spinning. I view the bolt as the heavy-duty hardware to keep the holds from breaking off the wall, and the screw to be the small hardware that prevents the hold from spinning around the bolt if the climber grips the hold off center, which is common. Right now, I'm on my way to see a guy about some foam. The mats I got from some guy on Facebook Marketplace, and I strapped to my car so it looked like a nice high-top haircut. But they needed covers, so instead of buying them, I made a nice little sweatshop for my mom to teach me how to sew some. She essentially did the entire first one by herself, and that's why the rest aren't done yet. We have bed sheets on them until I can find the right fabric. Turns out mats require a lot of surface area to cover. But that's it. That's all I have to share that would be worthwhile to add to the already great content from other creators. There's a lot more I want to do with this, like add rails to the top and some netting, and even add more wall to the top of this section. But that's for a time when the kids start to outgrow the first 9 feet, which might be sooner than I think. But thanks for watching, and I hope you're able to take away something from this video. This is one of my New Year's goals for 2026, and I wouldn't call it all the way accomplished, but it's almost there. This is the first video I posted in a while without unicycles, and I feel like something's missing, but if you're interested in this sort of build, or unicycles, consider subscribing. Thanks and good luck with your own wall.